We're now moments away from being joined by one of my favorite regular contributors. I don't know where he went. We were just talking a moment ago. I'm talking, of course, about Army, well, I should say retired Army, former psychological operations specialist Scott Bennett. And Scott's going to be joining me today to discuss the alarming lack of attention that's been given to this matter of a U.S. Air Force operative. This woman was a counterintelligence specialist who defected to Iran in, I believe, 2013, and has now been indicted by the Department of Justice, being accused of espionage. So a lot of people who follow QAnon are very concerned with these sealed indictments. I do not think, and I have never thought, that the existence of sealed indictments in and of themselves are indicators of anything. I have a feeling there are probably thousands of sealed indictments at any given time. One that's been unsealed is this indictment against Monica Witt. Monica Witt was an intelligence officer with the U.S. Air Force who later became a contractor and began to become disenchanted with the actions and activities of the United States military and the intelligence apparatus, at which point she became an informant to Iranian intelligence services. And we've got KQ American Woman telling me that Fidel Castro was of Iranian bloodlines. And that's interesting. We definitely want to get Scott's input. I was just texting with him a moment ago. I'm not sure what's going on. I am live right now, Scott. Scott's going to give us some insight into this matter. He was feeding me quite a bit of information about this last week while I was in Mexico at the Anarchapulco conference. I hope people will go back and take a look at some of the interviews and videos that were produced there in Mexico. It's strange to me because there's just been an amazing amount of attention given to this fake news created by essentially a virtually unknown actor. I had not heard of Jussie Smollett before this whole situation came about, with him accusing these Nigerian brothers of assaulting him with Donald Trump statements and homophobic and racial epithets. Clearly fake news. He's now been arrested by Chicago PD. He's going to be charged with filing a false police report. Things are not looking good for Jussie Smollett in terms of continuing his career as an actor. He is in danger now of facing some time in prison. There's a possibility of a grand jury being impaneled, and earlier this morning, CPD gave a press conference in which they detailed the actions that led them to arresting the actor. But okay, I think we've got Scott with us now. Scott, can you hear me?
Very good, Jason. We had to restart. There's always a glitch.
No problem. I understand completely. You and I are definitely touching on some topics that people who are, let's call them enemies of the truth, maybe not wanting us to talk about, but I'm pleased to have you with us this morning. And I was just going over some of the strange, I don't know what to call it really, but it's just very bizarre to me that the media and the American public have been so very focused on Jussie Smollett's fake news and have been virtually ignoring this matter of Monica Witt, who is a former Air Force officer turned intelligence contractor, now turned potential spy for the Iranian government. What can you tell us about this situation, Scott?
Well, let's start off with the Jussie Smollett analysis, because I think this is very, very important to set the stage, and it's part of a pattern, but few people are really looking at it as it needs to be looked at, and need to prepare themselves to respond in a way that is necessary. I think this This Jussie Smollett thing obviously was a race baiting, a homophobic baiting psyop. This was a false event. This was designed either by Smollett or others, and he was a pawn in it. Just before they were trying to put in some various legislation about hate crimes, and we know how that goes. It's an intimidation tactic. It's an authoritarian attempt to influence people's opinions and behaviors based on a fraud, based on a non-existent issue, which is rampant racial Ku Klux Klan, Nazi, fascists running around the country wearing MAGA hats underneath white robes and burning torches. And all of that is propaganda. And it's necessary to understand that this was not just the media behaving inappropriately or overreaching or getting excited. This was a purposeful, intentional attempt to really psychologically traumatize white, heterosexual, or people inclined in that sort of direction, philosophically, spiritually, politically, emotionally. This was an attempt to traumatize those people into a subservient, a submissive, a fearful, a retreating posture. And you can tell that. And again, I know I look at things militarily, I look at them PSYOP, information operation wise, but it's very important to understand that this was an aggressive attack posture that they were launching against us. And I'll put myself right up front. Those people who voted for Donald Trump, who do not subscribe to the modern leftist ideology or dogma or fascist authoritarian talking points, however you want to define them. So this was an attempt to attack me, attack us, attack people who do not subscribe to that view, and traumatize and put them on the retreat. And all of the politicians, including Kamala Harris, and all of the media, including CNN and MSNBC, and all of these groups, jumped on this and regurgitated this narrative that was completely false and is being proven as a criminal act. And Smollett has just been arrested. And we knew this from the beginning. I said it from the beginning. This smells like a psyop. And now we see the stories falling apart. The two Nigerian guys that he paid to beat him up are going state's evidence, and they're telling the truth without any alleged plea deal, although I'm sure one is there. And we now see that this gay black actor, Smollett, is a complete liar and a fraud. But what is dangerous is this was meant to ignite a racial war, a civil war, a smoldering one. They do not have to be these infernos, these out of control, white hot riots like in the Rodney King riots days or the Watts riots or any other riots. That's not what is dangerous. It is these smoldering, festering distrusts and hatreds that this Smollett guy was trying to ignite. And yes, he was trying to advance and defend and enlarge his homosexual political ideology. That's why they do this, is to throw the victimhood card out there so that he becomes a victim. And anyone that does not allow their kids to be taught this garbage in school, or does not vote for Democrats, or has the gall to vote for Trump or Republicans, is a abusive Klan member, ideologue that distrusts or doesn't believe him. So they've come at this from all angles to try and browbeat, to try and strangle the American public into submission in a chokehold using this victimhood status. But it's blown up, it's fallen apart, and what do people do now, Jason, is the key question. Well, what needs to happen now very quickly is Donald Trump needs to get on the podium and say there is a serious problem in America. There's a serious problem when people intentionally make up false attacks in order to try and trigger racial wars and fights in this country. And the media did this, and Smollett did this, and he's a liar. And yes, you go through the process of due process in court, but at the end of the day, if the evidence shows it, he should be charged with a federal hate crime. He should be charged, and the maximum prison sentence put on him because this needs to send a message to everybody that would propagate similar hate crimes, like Al Sharpton's girl years
Tawana
and years
Brawley.
ago.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This cannot be tolerated, and it should not be tolerated, and this now needs to be offensively attacked. We cannot be defensive. We cannot be silent. We cannot allow the media who have blown up this to simply run away into the shadows and hide and wait for the next story. They need to be doggedly pursued. They need to have their public affairs offices called, and politicians need to be put right in the spotlight to really attack that this was an attempt to destabilize the country. This was an internal insurrection attempt. This was all propaganda, and it has exact reflections of the Covington students incident and so many others where they've invented these false accusations. But this was a particularly ugly and violent one because it was pure black, homophobic, anti-Trump in Chicago attempts to really attack the Trump voter. So people really need to understand that this they're not going to stop if they don't get counterattacked. And the way that you counterattack them is with the truth. They've lost all integrity, of course, but this again loses more and more integrity of the media. And their arrogance needs to really be put down in check. And this is how it is put down. Otherwise, they will continue with no remorse, no restraint, no hesitation. Anyone that believes the media or the left is simply trying to make a better world is a fool, because these actions demonstrate an attempt to implement an authoritarian, violent ideological fascism on people, and doing it through these victimhood moments of crisis, of complete fabricated, invented assaults. And it's an assault on the American people, and I really hope and pray Trump gets up and says something. You can't be weak or cowardly about addressing this. You have to take the initiative and go on the attack, and put everything back on the media. There's a reason when he says fake news, fake media, everyone despises and boos and hisses when they turn around. Well, because of this case, Jason, the media will be lucky, and I think they will escape, because the conservatives, by temperament, are a little bit more polite than the liberal leftists are. But they're lucky they escape rooms with their lives as a result of this and what they did to the Covington kids, because it is not about this Smollett guy. It is, and you listen to the sound bites of all the media people. They were frothing at the mouth with hatred, with bloodlust.
Yeah.
They wanted to kill every conservative that voted for Donald Trump using this Smollett case as a license. It's very lucky, and in a sense, it is why I'm outraged by this, that you didn't have people walking down the street in Chicago who were white or who were any other color, but mostly white, of course, that weren't killed or mugged or beat up or their car windows smashed, or other people with MAGA hats beaten up or had rocks thrown at them. That's the real ugly potential of what happens when you do this sort of propaganda. But I think it needs
Scott,
to maximum prosecute.
Let me ask you a few questions, because you're raising a lot of points, and I don't want to get too far behind here. So I agree that this Jussie Smollett story is important. I didn't mean to diminish the importance of it, and I agree that it does speak not well of the media. I think that people like you and I, and many of the viewers of Crowdsource the Truth, and people who have read Shell Game, the book that you've written, we're already aware that the media is pretty close to constantly lying to us. The thing that's so strange about this, you brought up Tawana Brawley, and I grew up in New York, so this story, before it was on a national stage, was a big deal here in New York. I remember in high school this happened. I was in high school, I should say, and nobody, as far as I recall, yeah, 1990. So this is Al Sharpton in 1990, and he was a very kind of eccentric, flamboyant reverend who came to the aid of this girl, Tawana Brawley, who, as I recall, had claimed to have been raped, and later it was shown to be a complete hoax. Now, the interesting thing, however, is that Al Sharpton remains in the media today, and if anything, is regarded as a respectable member of the political punditry and is looked upon as an elder statesman in the civil rights movement and a representative of the black community in America. I don't understand why he hasn't been shunned as a moron and a hoaxer, but you know, again, it's very often with these psychological operations, it's the first story that gets out there into the public, you know, into the zeitgeist, as it were, that sticks with people. Is that not a major component of psychological operations in general, Scott?
Well, it is more, I would say, the absence of the internet that has prevented Al Sharpton's crimes from becoming publicly aware. If it happened now and this came out, he would have been burned. He would have been cast aside. But you're right. It's all about going on the attack. It's all about constantly moving the subject matter. That's why liberal leftists and politicians are good at this, and the media are sadly becoming good at it in shifting the language around, shifting the perspective around, and moving from one thing to another. You know, they never answer questions directly either, so they're never pinned down on this sort of subject. So Al Sharpton in this role with Tawana Tarpley or whatever her name is. This happening in 1990, it was relatively unknown because it was on the mainstream media only. No one dug into this, and no one read the papers that did dig into it. So,
yeah. So they're very skilled at putting forward these stories. Now, I agree that the media was...
But here's the thing. No one went on the attack. See, that's the problem. That's always the problem, Jason. People are too polite. And when I say polite, that does not mean you have to be a lunatic, a maniac, an angry, mouth-frothing, you know, violent person when you go and you articulate the truth or when you attack lies. It by all means, it means going into any discussion of issues to present the truth and doing it with a diplomacy, a respectfulness, but a firmness, an uncompromising, laser in your eye, fortitude, that you are not interested in friendship, you're not interested in politics, you're not interested in anything but presenting the facts and the truth. And that gets you leaning forward in military terms. And when you lean forward, there is a psychological, subconscious, emotional sense of the other person telling lies that causes them to back up, because they know if they come into a direct clash, their lies, their facts, which are not existent, will come apart, and they will come apart. So there's a subconscious dimension to combating for the truth, if you will. And that's been the problem. No one has been leaning forward. Mitch McConnell and the majority of the Republicans have always just sat straight. They've never been leaning forward, and that allows these liars to just dance around and attack from another angle. When they do this Smollett case, that is why it requires an offensive leaning forward action where you are going directly and you are prosecuting these people with what they did. You reported a lie. You did it intentionally. You did it to disturb the country. You did it to outrage black gay actors all around the country, to start throwing stones and cripple and hurt MAGA Trump voting people. That's a crime. That destroys any credibility that you had as a media person. You should be charged with aiding and abetting. You should lose your entire readership. You should be sued for slander. You should be sued for libel, as the Covington lawyer now is doing in response to what they did to the Covington kids. So it's until you take on the full attack and you go after them, which Trump needs to do. This is not a personal animus against the media that he has. They are destabilizing the country by these actions. Never mind all the other false flags, but this particular one, needs to be developed into a positive rather than letting it just kind of disappear.
I'm looking forward to Nick Sandmann's lawsuit against the Washington Post. I'm proud of this young man for standing up for his rights and coming after them. This is a kid who obviously was just standing there, and this sort of unusual looking older man got right up to him beating a drum, and he was uncomfortable, so he kind of like had an uncomfortable smile on his face, and immediately the media, the very same media, we should add, Scott, the Twitterati and all the crazy people who call for Donald Trump to be assassinated on Twitter but remain, fully tweeted up with all of their Twitter followers, while conservatives like Laura Loomer get kicked off for pointing out the bias and inappropriate actions of Ilhan Omar, etc. This guy, Nick Sandmann, just stands there trying to keep a cool posture, and he gets accused of being a racist. I mean, he's 15. That's a very difficult age for someone to have that kind of national attention on him. And he's not an actor. He's just a private citizen. Let me, real quick, we'll finish up on this Jussie Smollett thing, and I want to move on to Monica Witt. But I agree with you that the media was, of course, complicit. But it's strange to me. I mean, this guy is not Bono or Tom Cruise or a household name that everybody has heard of, but yet he's hanging out with Barack Obama. I know Empire is a popular show. I haven't actually watched it, but I don't know. I mean, does that get you to meet the president? And of course, he's been closely associated with Kamala Harris, who's now running for president. He had, right out of the gate, very early support from Cory Booker, who has been dubbed Mr. Peanut by Mike Moore of True Pundit. I don't know if you know about that, but Cory Booker somehow is Mr. Peanut. Seems like this is a prime example, Scott, of the interaction, I don't think we'd be misspeaking to call it collusion, between the political elite and the media and Hollywood. We really see the machine in operation and everything in full swing on this Jussie Smollett case, and I think he basically went in 1 week from an asset to a liability, and he's going to get dropped like a bag of dirt.
Well, Jason, you articulated very well their Achilles heel in when you said the machine in action. What we're witnessing is exactly that. Where all the gears are and how it is connected to various wheels within wheels is a matter of research and letting this unfold. However, what this did was throw a sledgehammer right against a big part of it and knocked a lot of this out of functioning. And that's what you saw when Cory Booker ran for the hills and said, I'm going to wait till all the evidence comes out. And he just kind of turns around. Kamala Harris, the same thing, stuttering and stammering and at a loss for words, because she was questioned about Smollett and the falsity and his deception here. So when they stutter and stammer and change their story and become a little bit, I just want to get along. I just want the country to be happy and full of kittens and cotton candy. Can't we just do that, please? Let's just move on. No, we can't, because you're not about that. You're about garbage and death and destruction through the fascist, Stalinist, liberal leftist ideology. Make no mistake about it. And these people need to be seriously politically attacked. I mean, everywhere, Jason. You need to have people on the Senate floor and the House floor calling out these media and these leftists for it. You need to have the president calling them out. You need to have people besides just Tucker and Hannity talking about these things in a prosecution, in a legal way, in a sociological way. This wasn't, and these things, if it was done by, to a Mexican gay actor, you'd have the same thing. Don't make that mistake that if it is not pounced on now, you're going to have another Jussie Smollett Sanchez in Texas or somewhere going through the same thing, and it's going to be blamed on white MAGA hat owners. And don't think they won't regurgitate the same absolute nonsense. They do. They always do if they're not checked. So this exposure to the Smollett media, a political connection, and they're fawning over him. He could be an asset. He could be something much more, or he could be just really dumb and gay and just wants to turn America gay. And that's a lot of their agenda. A lot of their belief system is pedophilia. It's getting it into school.
Well,
It's
Scott,
getting
let's
man
be
boy.
careful. Let's not conflate homosexuality with pedophilia, because one is a crime and the other is a lifestyle. But I mean, this
Well,
guy definitely.
one is trying to be made into legal, Jason. Let's not
I don't
lose
think we can
perspective on
accuse
that.
this guy of pedophilia, though. He is
No, I'm
he is
not.
an
I'm
openly
not.
gay
But I'm
man.
saying a
But
lot of the
let
political
me
forces
let me
have that
redirect you for 1 second, because this guy Jesse Smollett definitely put the ass in asset. He gets around. I don't know if he is the star of Empire. I don't think so, because I was reading in Variety that they're cutting scenes with him. So this is a sort of a peripheral actor in a show that's not even like the most popular show in the country or anything like that. But here he is with Maxine Waters. I mean, this guy really seems to get around. He knows Kamala Harris. He knows Maxine Waters. We've got Mr. Peanut using this incident to advance this anti-lynching bill. Now, I mean, whether you're conservative or liberal, I think everybody would agree that, you know, hanging someone to death, particularly if they haven't been accused of a capital crime and convicted, is absolutely wrong and should be. I don't understand why it's not. It's got to be a felony. It's attempted murder. But here we see, even in this headline, 4,700 people were lynched between 1882 and 1968. So why is Cory Booker interested in 2019 in legislation to address a problem for which significant statistics don't seem to exist beyond 1968? Obviously, the civil rights movement was an important advance in the history of the United States of America, but this seems like a very as you said, race-baiting, kind of regressive, like going back to the days where Lyndon Johnson tried to stoke racial tension. You know, Johnson obviously is credited with passing the Civil Rights Bill, but I think by most accounts he was a racist, trickster, criminal.
Well, I've never watched the Empire show, and I never will. I don't have interest in that stuff. But 1968 was 50 years ago.
Right.
So you're right. This is an attempt to use history to resurface it and politicize it for these modern political fascist authoritarian impulses. Jason, we have to remember what the leftist ideology believes. No one has a right to guns. Everyone has to have their gun taken away. Everyone has to be put in a 1984 cubicle work environment doing whatever it is. And the elite somewhere at the top are the ones who decide that for everyone. That's the basis of socialism, is someone needs to plan, and then someone needs to enforce the planner's plan upon everyone else. And I think, history, we have the luxury of examining a lot of the literature and the films that have produced that capture 1984 very well. And a lot of the intellectual struggles between capitalism and self and liberty. And I agree with Ron Paul. If liberty was increased in America, a lot of our problems would go away. I think that's a great quote by Ron Paul. If liberty is the solution to our problems, by allowing people to do what they want to do, associate with who they want to associate, and by nature that means disassociate with people and their lifestyles and their practices that you want nothing to do with. And that doesn't mean you have to tolerate them. That doesn't mean you have to learn their lifestyle and studies or force your kids to learn their lifestyle like we have in California and elsewhere. So, liberty is the antidote to the socialist fraud that only through socialism and communism will everybody be happy, and everybody will have a chicken in every pot, and everybody will have a car and a three-piece suit and a college education. No, everyone will be lowered to a similar status of misery through the shackles of taxation and authoritarian rule. So it's nonsense, and it is unnatural. It's not part of the human being natural impulse to generate property, to excel. A friend of mine who's a lawyer said you can practice socialism in the classroom. Just base everyone's grades on the cumulative whole of everybody's production in a classroom. So the people who get straight A's because they study 4 hours a day and excel and apply themselves, they're going to instead get a C because every other retard that doesn't know how to read and doesn't want
Scott,
to read
you
is
gotta
not
be
going to do anything.
you gotta be careful, man. There are people who have children that suffer from mental
Well, I'm okay. I'm
issues we
escaping
shouldn't
that. I'm
be
escaping that.
insensitive
I'm
to.
saying,
Let's focus on
if
the
everybody was
socialism.
equal,
Hang on. Let's focus on the socialism aspect, because I do think there is a big move to create these sort of socialist celebrities who are on the left. We've got Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who has been, championing these socialist ideas. She obviously has no experience as an engineer, as an economist, as a politician. She was a waitress, and not even for that long. And she's now talking about building trains that are going to transport people around the country and around the world in lieu of airplanes. Ironically, we've seen the state that you're in, one of the wealthiest states in the nation with a GDP that exceeds most countries, has been unable to successfully build a high-speed rail from Los Angeles to San Francisco, a route, I mean, I've done that drive many times. It would be nice if there was a high-speed rail. So we got a lot of unrealistic ideas being pushed essentially by celebrities. And I want to transition now to our other story here about Monica Witt. But first, I want to remind everyone that Scott is an author, and you can go to his website, shellgamewhistleblower.com, and you're going to be able to read more about Scott and purchase his books there. You can support Scott financially, and you can, of course, purchase a copy of Shell Game. Scott was a whistleblower on the terrorist financing that was going on and the likely complicity of individuals within the intelligence community and contractors at places like Booz Allen Hamilton, where Scott himself has worked. And Scott, you and other guests on Crowdsource the Truth have told us about this very significant problem of private contractors to excuse me, the intelligence community. And this woman, Monica Witt, was exactly that. She was an Air Force officer. We know another Air Force officer whose motives are questionable. But
she wasn't an officer. She was not an officer.
What was
she was
there?
A specialist. She was enlisted. That's very important.
Okay, good. So she's enlisted in the Air Force, not an officer, but she's an enlisted person there who got involved in counterintelligence. Can you explain to us, Scott, what exactly is counterintelligence? We've heard a lot now that Andrew McCabe has been flapping his gums and spewing lies about counterintelligence investigations versus criminal investigations. What is the difference, and what is a counterintelligence investigation?
Well, this Monica Witt situation looks very, very sketchy, and there's some very strange things about it. I've talked to people who know her and met her at the conference that was in question, that has been sanctioned by the Treasury Department in the last week or so. So there's a drama here that is unfolding as part of a larger, I think, PSYOP and operation meant to engineer and gear up potential war with Iran, though I don't think that'll happen. I don't think the president will allow that. It would be the ending of his presidency, I think, and I agree. Tucker Carlson has said the same thing, and others have. But to get back to your question, counterintelligence, essentially you're investigating the attacks and the perpetrators that are trying to penetrate and coerce your people or steal your information, or engage in any targeting information against your forces, your structure, your property. And it's sort of searching out for the rat that you can hear in the walls somewhere, and trying to decide how they got in the walls and what they're doing and where their nest is, sort of a thing. So counterintelligence is a reverse Sherlock Holmes detective situation. But however, Monica Witt, there's some oddities about this, because, as you know, Jason, I'll say this whole thing started when you and I were at the Operation Classified conference with John Wells and a variety of others, Kevin Shipp and Sidney Powell, and I think you did some wonderful interviews with Kevin Shipp and Sidney Powell and James and Joanne Moriarty. And what what happened to me was very strange. I had a lady come up to me and say she needed to meet me, and it was urgent, and she came so far to meet me, blah blah blah. And I said, well, I'll meet you in the lobby. I'm happy to, but I'm not going outside. She tried to get me to go outside to a restaurant, and I said no. And what had happened was she sat down at a table with me, and I was alone with her, and she said, I've come so far, I like your work, but we need more. And I looked at her with a quizzical look, and I said, who are you? And she looks to her left, and she looks to her right, and she leans over the table and whispers to me, I'm with Iranian intelligence. Well, I knew that was a lie because they don't operate that way. And I called people that I know from the conference, and I said, is this something? And they said, absolutely not. No one would ever approach you or approach anyone in that sort of a fashion. You'd be met in a foreign land, or you'd have been met when you're here, or you'd be met somewhere else, but no one would come across. So I knew that this was an FBI or CIA or Mossad or MI6 or some sort of a foreign operation, or perhaps someone Anthony Schaefer was trying to send down my way, because I had interfaced with him about Iran and these other things, and 9/11, and he completely abandoned and denied 9/11 was a hoax, and he said, I have a friend who saw a plane hit the Pentagon. And I said, well, I was there by the Pentagon. There was no plane. And he just nodded, and he wouldn't back down from that story. So right after my confrontation, if you will, with Anthony Schaefer, I had this woman come up to me and claim to be an Iranian intelligence agent, which was all fraudulent. And I said, well, look, I'm happy to talk at a conference or any sort of academic environment. I've been over to Iran. I've been invited to speak among many others in the American military intelligence government community, but that's what I do. I don't do anything else. And right after that meeting is when all of this started to unfold. You had 2 Iranians allegedly arrested in California for spying or taking pictures of MEK, which is the terrorist organization that photograph of Monica Witt, the center photograph, looks remarkably similar to one of the books on MEK. So it looks like they've stolen.
Who is MEK?
MEK is the Mujahideen al-Khaliq, Saudi Sunni terrorist group within Iran that was expelled after the revolution, but was the ones that have been launching attacks in Iran. They invented the term "Death to America." They're ironically backed by Bolton and Giuliani.
Wow!
But it's a mercenary group now being branded similar to the the Shalabi group that we were trying to position into Iraq. This MEK group is seen by much of the world as terrorists, and we had them on our terrorist list, but now they're our convenient pawns in this chess game against Iran. So the enemy of my enemy is my friend, sort of thing. But what happened after I met this person, or she approached me, you had also Marzia Hashimi, the Iranian Press TV journalist, arrested in America, taken to the Washington FBI office, held for a week, and put into an interrogation, then forced to testify at a grand jury hearing. Then she was released. Well, what she testified about, 3/4 of the questions, revolved around the conference that I had said I went to, which was the New Horizon Conference, and others have gone to. I'm not saying this is about me, but there's some strange connections here. So she tells the interrogators in the court about this secret indictment about the New Horizon Conference, and they were asking, is it a recruitment tool? Is it a platform for bringing in spies? Is it an anti-American group, anti-Israel group? What is it? And she said, I have nothing to do with the group. I'm a journalist at Press TV. I've attended it. I've reported on it. But then they let her go. And the next thing that happened right after she testified was when they launched this U.S. sanctioning of the New Horizon Conference. And Munchen, the Secretary of the Treasury, with Air Force and with FBI and other forces, have sanctioned the New Horizon Conference, Nader Talebzadeh and his wife, and another guy who put it on, Hamid Gashgavi, and called them enabling, the Iran Republican Guard to recruit spies and things like that, which is complete nonsense. It's an academic forum where authors and writers and singers and basic, intellectuals and artists are invited to Iran to talk about what they are passionate about. And they try and bring people that are interested about peace and stability. I went because I thought this is a great opportunity to establish a relationship. And I look at all miscommunication as the source of conflict. And miscommunication is fixed like you fix a leaky pipe. You go in, you take it apart, you tighten it up, you put some fresh tape around it, you do some cauterization, and boom, you fix the miscommunication. And you do it with facts, you do it with a dedication to truth, and you do it with a mutual, where can we work together? What do we have in interest? Where are our commonalities? Our children, our family, our social existence. You can't argue and you can't debate and you can't establish a relationship with a Wahhabist because they're about killing themselves and going to their 72 virgins in heaven. That's the Saudi Arabian, Qatari, United Arab Emirate approach. But the Iranians don't have that in their vocabulary. They don't blow up themselves in suicide bombings, nor do they engage in these sort of offensive actions. So the definition we've applied to Iran is propaganda, and it's propaganda because it's against the narrative of oil and our arms relationship with the Saudis and the broader agenda to disintegrate Iran, like we've tried to do to Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and Syria, and that's always been the agenda. So this Monica Witt is the convenient scapegoat to say this woman was an American Air Force specialist who became disgruntled with America, went over to Iran, turned Muslim, and then started giving up her Facebook friends to Iranian tech people to create target packages around. That's their story. But the reality is a little bit different. This woman went to a Hollywood conference before Nader Talebzadeh took control of the conference or organization, so he shouldn't even be listed. She was not invited. She just showed up, according to Kevin Barrett, who's met her. Kevin
What do you mean
Barrett
the Hollywood conference? What was the Hollywood conference?
It was called the Hollywoodism. I didn't go, but I didn't even know about it at the time. But Hollywoodism was a conference where they were analyzing the moral impact of Hollywood films upon society at large. The sexual pornography, the blood, the death, the destruction, the negative moral undertones in Hollywood. Not the Anne of Green Gables, not where the red fern grows, not where Lassie comes home, but some of the more vicious and vile and pornographic and sadistic elements of Hollywood films and moral abandon was being looked at. What is the effect on society? What is the effect on the psyche? It's the same thing that sociologists do. It's the same thing that psychologists do.
It seems a reasonable thing to have a conference about. People are allowed to explore that, aren't they?
Well, we would hope. In a healthy society, that's how you generate health. How you generate corrosion and destruction is through allowances of very violent, poor things to infect the psyche and manifest your behavior around those imaginations. That's why pornography and a lot of that stuff has a very corrosive effect on marriage and relationships. So there are some dangerous things that when we expose ourselves to it, it can have a very debilitating effect on our personalities and our relationships.
Scott, let me ask you this. Isn't America supposed to be about, if we have collectively voted and decided that pornography is legal, even though many people may morally object to it, so it's legal, it's there. Isn't America about, we've got people who dislike it, who are going to have a conference to talk about all the things that you're saying, how it deteriorates marriage and relationships and objectifies women and gives young men maybe dangerous ideas about sexual relationships, etc. And then there can be another conference about people who love pornography and let them debate. We're really in a zone right now where something gets dubbed hate speech or negative or somehow bad. And then we see someone like Tim Cook of Apple Computer, who frankly, in my view, should be more worried about where the hell the magnetic AC power cord went on the computer than his moral opinions of society. He's saying it's Apple Computer's moral duty to suppress hate speech, and therefore they've kicked Alex Jones off of Apple platforms. We're in this post-constitutional world. We're deeply in it. We're way past constitutional rights and the right to free speech. Free speech is, hate speech is free speech. Someone who is hateful should be given a platform so we can listen to what they have to say and then reject it. And that person can be shunned in the market of free ideas, but they should be allowed to speak.
Yeah, well, I agree with you, Jason. It's a very balanced way of presenting it, and I agree with you. That's what the purpose of free speech and conferences are all about. You need to have these dialogues before you can initiate legislation and law that will corral and control people's actions. That's the purpose of dialogue. That's the purpose of the Senate and the House, is to have these debates and discussions. But sadly, we've got a bunch of Barbie and Ken dolls in the Congress and the Senate, and I use it advisedly with a plastic emasculation, because they have no real dynamic, virility in the arena of debate and discussion and analytical thought. You know, the pornography thing and the free speech issue and the Supreme Court ruling, that's a different subject. It applies to it, but these sort of debates sticking on that are necessary. That's what the conference did. So that's why it's disturbing on a lot of levels that they did this. Look, I would never, ever betray my country or tolerate anyone who does. When you take an oath to your country, to your Constitution, it is lifelong. It never goes away. That's why I was so and am continuing to be so passionate and fearless and ruthless in taking my report, Shell Game, to the highest levels of the military and the government and the media that I can, and forcing them to take a position on it, and based on that position, assume the effects of that, the responsibilities of that. Because I know everything I discovered and did and checked was part of my official duties as a military officer. It wasn't just something I had the choice to do. I was given orders to do this. And in fulfillment of my orders and my duty, I found one of the greatest corruptions in the history of the American Republic. And the vanguards, the custodians of the American Republic, the people in the Senate and the House, in the intelligence committees, in the military armed services committees, in the Homeland Security committees, did absolutely nothing. And I have the paper to prove it. And I will hang them by that paper. So I take it very personal when people talk about betraying your country and this and that. But Witt did not do that in this sort of a way. She left the Air Force, and 5 years later, she goes to Iran. 5 years. Not in when she's in or when she just gets out. 5 years later. And she doesn't...
They say she revealed classified information about top secret programs. Is that not correct?
Well, I don't know if she did, but I mean, that's what they've leveled in the indictment. That's what they've mentioned in the indictment, which could be true, or it could be pure propaganda meant to orchestrate a political move to shut down everybody from going to this conference, because now you've got the moral justification with the traitor, allegedly, who needs to be given due process. She should come back and challenge the charges, but you've conveniently now told everybody you can no longer go to this conference, or else you're going to be given 20 years and a fine. 20 years, you can be thrown in jail if
just
you go
for going to that conference.
If you go to a conference because you are going to a sanctioned conference, you are helping a sanctioned entity. Not, I want to go to Iran and speak to Iranian students and make them love America more than they hate America. No, you can't go to Iran. You can't go to any country that is sanctioned. So that's where it harms my constitutional rights, my right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and the production of property and my vocation. So for that reason, all people...
You're engaged in diplomacy here, Scott. You're just addressing the conference and meeting people. And what's the Mark Twain quote about international travel is the cure for xenophobia?
Well, I think that's a wise observation. But it's dangerous when we go into this authoritarian mode. And I don't ascribe any wisdom to it. And if Trump is part of it, he needs to fix it and correct it. If he is not part of it, then he needs to investigate and stop what these people have done, because it's a perfect way to stop people from going over. And now it was done in conjunction with the Pompeo meeting in Poland to try and gin up all sorts of anti-Iran, rhetoric in preparation for some sort of a conflict, which fell flat, seemingly. And the Munich conference, a similar event happened where all the Europeans basically are not going the way of American interventionism anymore. Why? Because they've suffered the shrapnel of it. They've suffered the human refugee by the millions flooding up into Europe because we've destroyed their civilizations. So this gin up to war that John Bolton and Pompeo seem to be pushing Trump in by calling Iran the terrorist state. Iran is this, Iran is that. Look, Jason, I'm not a pro-Iranian person. I am just a pro-truth person, and I hate lies and liars. And I can tell you, when I was in Iran, I didn't see anything negative. I didn't see any violence against Jews or Christians. I didn't see any hatred. I saw very humble, solemn people that were like Hindus, Hare Krishnas, without the robe and with hair. I saw very normal people in a normal, healthy culture. And
You've heard a lot of very bad things, firsthand reporting on John Bolton from back in the day when he was in the Justice Department, and he would not listen to Brian Vukadinovich after Brian was maliciously prosecuted on 10 false criminal charges that he was able to defeat, defending himself pro se. So I agree with you there, Scott. I want to remind everybody that Shell Game is a book that you can purchase from shellgamewhistleblower.com. That is Scott's website, and you can read all about his uncovering of this bizarre terrorist financing and some of the duplicitous double dealing that seems really against the best interests of the American people. I want to bring you back to this issue of Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, because you and I have discussed this in private conversations, and frankly, I didn't know if you were prepared to bring this forward. Anthony Shaffer was most closely associated with the Operation Able Danger, which was a counterintelligence operation hunting terrorists within the United States, and he's positioned himself as a 9/11 whistleblower, appearing on InfoWars and coming to events like Operation Classified, which was, of course, hosted by John B. Wells, who was very generous with me, very friendly at the conference, allowed me to conduct those interviews with you and Sidney Powell and Kevin Shipp and Robin Gritz and various other people in a way that he absolutely didn't have to do. The thing that was so strange is after that conference, it's very interesting to note that Field McConnell, whose organization is known as Able Danger, not related to the Tony Shaffer Able Danger, other than the, I guess that would be alliteration, they sound the same. But right after that conference, the members of Able Danger turned against me and began publishing false stories on abledanger.org, which Field McConnell refused to demand evidence to support, refused to take them down after I told him they were flatly false. My passport, of course, would prove that I was not in Ukraine. I was not flying drones over Chernobyl, as they allege. There are multiple liars who have inserted themselves into the social media sphere where you and I and others are trying to gain traction for the truth. And I'll also tell people that I observed Tony Shaffer challenge Jimmy Moriarty in a way that I found very strange. Right, you were there. We were all sitting at the opening night, meet the speakers dinner or a cocktail party, whatever that was. And I find Jimmy and Joanne Moriarty not only to be so credible and the evidence that they've presented in terms of their own photographs and video interviews, they're also two of the nicest people I've ever met. I don't understand what could be their motivation to make up a story like this? We know they've been pursued. And I don't know Tony Shaffer really at all, but there are a number of things that have happened that cause me to question his motives. What else can you tell us about this?
Well, Jason, you and I have been targeted. There are people I think are liars or fools or assets who are inventing stories about me running guns out of Tampa, Florida, CENTCOM.
Oh, yes, I know who you're talking about. Also a former Air Force member of the Air Force, also a contractor to the government, also a blatant liar who has published the same false story that appeared on abledanger.org. So these people do seem to be working in concert, Scott, don't they?
Well, they do. But, you know, the hope, of course, is good people. We don't care about them, Jason. We care about the people who want the truth and listen to these programs and trust you for the truth and for observation and analysis that will help and encourage them, that will give them strength and clarity and understanding what's going around in the country. So we're here for them to talk, to enable them. The liars and the counter, you know, these operators who are trying to throw propaganda and mud and all of that. Hey, that's part of being a leader. That's part of being in the arena. They're just weaklings and cowards because, as you know, when you get them into a corner, they whimper and come apart at the seams. They're not worth it. They're paper tigers. And this Tony Shaffer is a paper tiger. And I've seen that up close and personal because I know how they act. They look down. They don't look you in the eye. They back away. They huff and they puff. They have no substance to them whatsoever. And, you know, our substance is the truth. And our substance is the animation of the truth is our love for the country and the Constitution and the freedom and America. And it's not about going around and destroying nations. It's about raising up and making our own, the shining city on a hill. And that's how you win the hearts and minds of the world around you. You don't do it by going in and doing forcible regime changes. Tony Shaffer and these other neocon warmongers live by war. You know, I've seen people who are retired generals go up and constantly make everybody an enemy. That's like saying everybody is a nail and I'm a hammer, but you have to pay me to put them down. You have to pay me to hit the nail. Well, that's how these retired generals and admirals and colonels make a living. They make everybody a nail, every country a war in pursuit of democracy, freedom, happiness, and capitalism. And it's all lies. It's all absolutely nonsense. So Tony Shaffer, I think, was probably behind the woman coming up to me, or at least he played a part in it, who claimed to be an Iranian intelligence officer. I think it was a complete fabrication, but it's part of this ongoing narrative to try and push us in these wars. And he was all about that. You remember at the conference, he said he was all about taking away mineral resources of other countries using national defense. So it wasn't about national defense. It was about national military forces going into countries and taking their natural resources. That's where America's economic life is now going to be turning. We're never going to pay back our debt. We are going to go around the world and confiscate oil and timber and diamonds and water and anything else using our military. That's the modus operandi. The danger is other countries saying no. The danger is Russia, Iran, China, Syria, Europe saying no. The danger is America being completely isolated. And now we have Venezuela, which we can keep off till next week. Yeah. But we have Venezuela turning into a potential Vietnam. And what is the result? And I said it before, and I said it at the Iran conference. Mr. President, these people are putting you in a trap for impeachment by these military moves. And if you don't extend, keep out of it, you're going to lose the election. People voted for you because they did not want wars and regime changes, not because they were afraid of war. Americans can fight a war better than any person on this planet, but they don't want war as recreational devices. They don't want war as pastimes. They only engage in war when their lives or their children or their property or their homes are put at risk, not when false flag events like 9/11 are used as a license to go around the world. That destroys us.
Yeah, and it seems like we've got guys like John Bolton and perhaps Tony Shaffer who are very adamant about promoting policies that would get us into wars. I'm not sure what is up with Tony Shaffer, who is now the principal at this London Center for Policy Research. I'm confused by this thing because there are people that I trust and respect who are involved, but I, like you, Scott, am very suspicious of this Tony Shaffer. There were other things that happened at that conference that I'm not prepared to speak about.
Remember, London is closely tied with the White Helmets and the White Helmet operations and the false
This
flag.
guy, London, from the London Policy Center, is tied to the White Helmets. He's died, Dr. London. Herbert London was his name.
Well, MI6 is tied in with all of these think tanks in Britain, and MI6 was orchestrating the White Helmet false Syrian chemical attack, which has been exposed by the BBC author, the BBC producer. I know we're packing a lot, but that's important to recognize too. The BBC producer has now come out and said that the BBC and this whole Syrian chemical false flag attack, or the chemical attack that the White Helmets reported that responded with Trump's Tomahawk missile strike,
right,
all of that was false.
Yeah.
That tells you right there. That's a war crime potential. Now, I know, there's so much happening, but these things are important because the entire Syrian operation that Trump has been engaged in has been a fabrication of this White Helmet chemical attack. Assad is a monster. That's why they hate Tulsi Gabbard and Dick Black.
Yeah.
And I say again, Tulsi Gabbard is going to be the Democrat nominee, I think,
right,
because she's the only person of peace.
Right. And then this also speaks to Andrew McCabe and his ridiculous book tour, all the nonsense he was saying on 60 Minutes. This is a serious story right here being reported just the other day by RT. And, there's a lot of people who will say, oh, well, that's Russian propaganda. But this is, as you said, this is coming from Vanessa Beeley, who is a highly respectable reporter,
yes,
who has been on the ground in Syria.
21st century fire.
Yeah, I mean, so this is a very interesting story that's getting nowhere near as much attention as Jussie Smollett. So I wonder to what extent those type of stories are created just to sensationalize the news and distract people from the real information, in a very similar fashion to how a fake story about me flying drones, which did not happen, or a fake story about you running guns, which did not happen, are being promoted by idiots, losers, and liars because they do not want you and I to get together and expose this kind of truth. Scott, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. We will be back next week, and until then, people can go to shellgamewhistleblower.com, purchase Scott's book there. It is extremely important that we support Scott and support Crowdsource the Truth. We're bringing this information to people. It's very unpopular. There are people trying to get us honey-trapped into fake espionage operations and all kinds of things like that. People can also support Scott by going to patreon.com/shellgame, and you can subscribe to Scott's Patreon page there. He's posting all kinds of videos and blog posts, and you can keep up with Scott while providing the financial support to a truth teller and just reading about all the different people that Scott is interviewing in his radio appearances, etc. I would also remind people that Crowdsource the Truth is a viewer-supported resource. So if you're watching the shows daily, if you enjoy the shows, please go to patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth or subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. Become a sponsor. You're going to keep these shows coming. Scott, thanks again so much. You're shedding light on some really important stories. I really appreciate it, and I'll speak to you next week.
Thank you, Jason. You're doing a great job, my friend. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Scott. I'll see you soon. And I'll see everybody tonight. We're going to have Larry Klayman on. I'm going to be talking to Larry about Ross Ulbricht, Roger Stone, the Mueller investigation, Andrew McCabe's lies, tons of information. So I'll see everybody tonight. Thanks for watching.